Hey there, before I start this video, there will be spoilers for Deltarune's Chapter 3 and 4, and all of Deltarune. Alright, you've been warned. I'm gonna start talking now. So, when I was making my review of Deltarune, I was reflecting a lot on the game, and I thought about the Zelda-like segments, which I talked about quite a bit in the video, both positively and negatively. The moments behind the stage have a lot of lore to them, and I am not here to analyze all of it. There have been many people who have gone over the lore in these chapters, like all of it, that are much better than me at doing that, so you should probably go check them out. I don't have any specific videos though. However, there is one mystery that I do feel like I need to find the answer for in this section, which has been bugging at me. Are we in control, or is Chris in control of the video game in the back? This question ended up giving me a theory that I didn't see coming that really foreshadows the future of the weird route in Deltarune. So before we start really, I just want to clarify that when I say Chris is in control, I mean, are we controlling Chris, who is controlling the game, or are we in the game itself? So there's arguments for both sides really. Now, why does it matter really? This section is extremely lore heavy, and I believe that a lot of things in these sections matter to the game. And this could really help with some answers about the future of the weird route, and stuff about Chris in general, and the Red Soul entirely. So before this all started, I was trying to make this video just who was controlling the backroom games. Wasn't the most interesting topic, I know, which I'm glad that I came to a theory about it. But when I first played the games, I thought this was very simple. I thought we were in the game itself, and that Chris wasn't playing it really. Now, what led to this conclusion was the soul being present when you boot up the game. When you boot up the game, the soul is there, and that it slowly loads with the Game Boy style Chris being overlapped with us, seeming to indicate that we ourselves were in the game controlling it. But what especially led me to this conclusion when I first played was us literally coming outside of the game as the Game Boy style Chris and walking towards them, clearly showing that we are not controlling Chris at that current moment. However, if Chris wasn't controlling the game, why would they look away when we stab Susie and Ralsei, seemingly to be flinching at doing it themselves? And why does the boss of the section, Antenna, comment and talk to Chris as if they were the ones playing? It doesn't really make that much sense. Is Chris supposed to be just watching while we play? Well, that wouldn't also make sense, because why would they be picking up the controller and holding it? There's really no point. They could just sit down and watch. Or why wouldn't Chris just leave when they had the opportunity to be free of us? Why wouldn't they just run out of the room? So there are major discrepancies in this, and there were many holes, so I didn't really have an answer for this. However, that's when it hit me. This section is really all about the weird route, with it foreshadowing the entire time. So what if this gives us the answer to a future happening within the weird route that could spell out the future for us? So this theory that I want to name, because everyone gets to name a fun theory and I feel left out now, is called player control theory. Work in progress. Might change it later. It's a little iffy, you know, because it doesn't fully fit with my theory or whatever. However, this theory not only tells us the answer to this mystery, like that I posed earlier, but also could confirm what will happen in the weird route and what could happen in the future of Deltarune. So let me set up this theory a bit. I want to go with some background about it. So this backstage section has a really heavy connection to the weird route, obviously, that it wears straight on its sleeve. It's pretty shameless. In the second section of the game, you go into a dungeon with a white mage that freezes enemies, which obviously parallels Noelle within the weird route in the game. They turn into the same shape that you freeze Birdly into, and this section literally requires you to freeze a blue bird that is blocking the route in order to progress. Couldn't be any more obvious. And I don't think there's any question that this is not supposed to display the weird route and be how you're supposed to kind of find it without looking up guides online. So with that in mind, whatever happens in this game that hasn't happened in the weird route is probably going to happen in some way. Whether this parallels something that will happen, like kind of happen, or literally will happen, is unclear. However, we can assume most of the things could appear in the weird route in some way, like us using up Noelle, like us using up Chris, stuff like that. That could literally happen within it in the future, because this foreshadows the future of the weird route. So let's talk about also the weird route exclusive scene in chapter 4 in the holiday house, as this will come back into play with my theory. So without going into too much detail, as not everything in this scene matters, you basically plant the thorn ring back into Noelle that Chris took out the previous night. This then puts Noelle basically back under the trance effect, where she will basically do something for a later chapter. It's basically being set up. Now, the imagery at the end of this scene is important because a red crack shows on the screen with a red dot in the center that starts to grow. A lot of us in the community, myself included, believe that we are almost growing a red soul inside Noelle to take control of her later, which is where this ties into my theory. Now, one last thing to fully tie this together, before I tell you my theory. So, controllers are interesting in Chapter 3, as they seem to be tied to specific characters, kind of. So, in the main game of Marvelous Mystery Board with Tenna, we learn into the game as our characters, and when Susie switches around the controllers, she takes control of Chris in the game, clearly showing that it's based on players in the ports, like first player is Chris, second player is Susie, third is Ralse. Now, you could just say they auto go as that, and I would agree, because when they switch it, it stays the exact same. However, later on in the chapter, when you're going through the TV world, to do some of the puzzles for optional items, you need the Lancer controller, which only is in effect when the Lancer specific controller is plugged in, which will let you take control of Lancer, which wouldn't really make sense because how would the game know specific controller equals specific character? So this is seemingly weird because there's no second port to the game that you're also plugging the Lancer controller into. It's probably just one port. However, this part of my theory isn't perfect, but it doesn't even matter that much. It's just some extra little sprinkles on to already, I feel, a pretty concrete solution to this. So it could be interpreted differently, but I feel like this does still work within my theory. So let's finally get to my theory of this whole video, the player control theory, work in progress title, which is that the on controller that we get in order to control the game doesn't just give us access to play as just the character as in Game Boy like style Chris in the game, but we are actually controlling and putting in a red soul in the game as the character we're controlling. When the game loads up, you see the red soul show, which then gets a Game Boy style Chris overlapped onto it that I mentioned earlier. By the way, even if you dispute this part of the game could still have a red soul like loaded into it, so it could still work. Now this is very specific, however, as there wouldn't be any reason for this to happen if not to represent something. So I think when you are playing the game, we are controlling Chris, who is then controlling the game. However, once we get to the ending of the game, we then take control of only the sprite version of Chris, because we choose to control only that entity of the red soul, which will then happen in the weird route with us just taking control of Noelle when she has the red soul planted in her. So let's talk more about the weird route real quick for some more evidence. If you think about it currently in the weird route, we are controlling Chris, who is taking advantage of Noelle and controlling her, which if you think about it, exactly parallels how we interact with the game backstage. We are controlling Chris, who is controlling Game Boy style Chris. I know it's a little weird, but if you remember earlier, I remember talking about us seemingly growing a red soul within Noelle for us to take control of her later. Us choosing at the end of the game to only control the video game style Chris parallels us only controlling Noelle later on in the game and no longer using Chris. You were used up, kind of similar. I also think that how the game is set up with us loading in a red soul within the game is supposed to show us that we as the player can take control of any red soul we choose at any time, as we can switch out of Chris extremely quickly, most likely after the boss fight was over, to just take control of Game Boy style Chris and then go back to Chris after we stop taking control of the Game Boy style one to pick up the Shadow Mantle. And I think this theory supports what many believe will happen within the game, which is Noelle being controlled by us directly, and strengthens my belief that this will happen later in the weird route. So let's go over this one more time, as this is a bit messy, I know. So the odd controller, or just a red soul, is in the game when we load it up. We have the ability to take control of only the Game Boy version of Chris at the end of this, seemingly showing that we can control any red soul we choose. We are seemingly growing a red soul inside Noelle. Whether it's just imagery is hard to say, but I think it's a lot likely literal. And we will take control of only Noelle later on, since we will no longer have a use for Chris, and possibly intimidate them, like how we intimidate them with Game Boy style Chris, like at the ending, where we walk towards them. And that's my theory. Thank you for watching. I know this could have been a little bit messy with all the stuff, me jumping back and forth, but I'm happy I could come up with the theory, as I see a lot of people are, and I wanted to bring up my own one. Now, whether this is technically a theory or analysis is left in the air, but I do think it's just a theory, as there is no hard evidence for this being the case. I know this isn't a revolutionary theory, as people have brought up like us controlling Noel, but I thought like this just backs up it with more evidence that I like, and I think this could cement it being almost the truth, honestly. And I'm just happy. Thanks for watching again, and goodbye.